My entire life, I have been on search for meaning. Not just meaning I make for myself, ultimate meaning, if there be any. When ultimate meaning is the goal, the question of God, or something like God, often tops the quest. I've thought a lot about God. I've engaged hundreds of theists and atheists, philosophers, scientists, theologians, sure about the so-called proofs or disproofs of God's existence, and also, if God exists, about what God is like, what are God's traits. But I've approached God from a largely Western perspective, skewing especially to Christian philosophy of religion. I now need to expand my search to non-Western religions and traditions, engage humanity's diverse kinds of ultimate meaning. This is global philosophy of religion, exploring the rich traditions of world religions, understanding each in its own context, and appreciating each relative to others. An axial issue is God's place in the great hierarchy of being. Western philosophy has God as ultimate, but in global philosophy, is God ultimate? I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn, and Closer to Truth is my journey. The idea of global philosophy of religion is to take religious topics which we think we understand in our own tradition and explore them in other traditions. Here's what I think I know about God. God is the absolute core of the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. There is no God in Buddhism, and God in Hinduism is complex, articulates with cosmic consciousness. I have much to learn. I start closest to home with the Abrahamic religions, but with the one I know least, Islam. What is God in Islam? I meet a distinguished Islamic scholar and teacher, the president of Zaytuna College, Hamza Yusuf. Hamza, I want to understand the depth of the nature of God or Allah.
Bismillah. The nature of God, the idea of God, first of all, is a very human idea, this concept that there's something beyond us, there's a creator. At the heart of Islam is to restore a radical monotheism to God, that God is one, without any partners, without any personas. For Muslims, we learn about God first and foremost from the Quran. But outside of that, there is also an understanding in our tradition that your belief in God should not be a type of imitation. Why do you believe in God? Because the Quran says so. Well, how do you know the Quran's from God? Because God says so. So there's this idea of trying to get out of that circular reasoning by really coming to a natural philosophy and a natural understanding of God. If we look at what the Quran says about God, the most fundamental thing it says about God is La ilaha illallah. There is nothing worthy of worship except the one true God. The most fundamental verse that tells us about God is the 112th chapter. So it says, Qul huwallahu ahad. Say God is one. And one is not a number in the Arabic tradition. Numbers begin with 2. So say God is unique, God is one. Allahu Samad, God is whole, God is infinite, God has no needs. And then Lam yalid wa lam yulad, God was not begotten, nor did he beget. And then finally, wa lam yakun lahu kufuwan ahad, there's nothing like unto God. Anything that occurs to your mind, God is other than that.
How do you contrast the two ideas that God is beyond categories and the so-called apophatic tradition that you can only know God is in the negative? And yet, on the other hand, you have the 99 names of God, which are all positive affirmation.
God is not a substance. There's no genus, so we can't define him in a traditional way. But at the same time, God is transcendent, utterly transcendent, but also that God allows us to know God, and the way God allows us to know is through attributes. But those attributes have to be understood in a kind of mathematical sense of any number over infinity is 0. So the idea that It's approximations. So the 99 names tell us that God is merciful and compassionate. Those are the first two attributes in the Quran. In fact, in our tradition, there are names that we don't know. God has withheld names from us. God has infinite names because he's infinite.
It's blazingly clear that God is one is the foundation of Islamic philosophy. God's radical oneness surely sets God as ultimate. But how does it relate to God's apparently personal traits? According to Allah's 99 names, like merciful, loving, forgiver, artist, judge, guide, watcher, and wise. I meet an Islamic philosopher of religion, mathematics, and logic with PhDs from Iran and Cambridge, Mohammed, Saleh, Zarepour.
God is not a person like us. But if you understand the notion of personhood as having some attributes that persons have, then of course God can be a person in this specific sense.
Will, intent, emotion.
Exactly. God can speak. Because according again to the mainstream understanding of the Islamic belief, the Quran must be considered the literal words of God.
So if they're literal words, God has to speak it in some way.
Exactly. But it doesn't mean that God is a person like us. I prefer to explain this distinction by saying that God is a personal being, but not a person. There is an important difference. We are persons, but we share some attributes with other things that are not persons. This table has a body, and we have bodies. But it doesn't mean that we are not animated objects. And in the same sense, can say that there are attributes that are shared between God and persons, but it doesn't make God a person.
If you're defining person in the sense of the characteristics of a human person, I think it's just slightly semantics, personhood versus person. You've written about John Hick's argument.
Hicks says that persons have explicit boundaries by which they are distinct from each other. And this boundary, for example, can be our bodies or something else, a spiritual boundary based on our souls or something like that. But he says that, on the other hand, we say that God is an infinite being. And therefore, if God is infinite, God has no limit, therefore has no boundary, and therefore God cannot be a person because all persons have boundaries. But I think this argument actually doesn't work, because I think if we understand the notion of infinity as having no limit, then in principle, there can be things which have no limit, but still they have a boundary. For example, if you consider the set of natural numbers and the set of rational numbers excluding natural numbers, both of them are infinite sets, but they are distinguished from each other, and in a sense, they both have no limits. And I say that, okay, God can be infinite, and at the same time, a person or personal being, as I prefer to say.
Islam has been an expansive religion, interacting with local traditions. I wonder the results. What happens to the local God when interacting with Islam? I discuss God in Africa with a philosopher of Islamic and indigenous religions of West and North Africa, Oludamini Ogunnaike.
The Yoruba live in southwestern Nigeria, Togo, Benin, and Togo. So amongst the Yoruba, there's the supreme deity, Oludamini, or Eledumare sometimes, who created everything, is the source of everything, and in certain understandings is kind of the deep ground of all consciousness and all being. And so he creates everything, but he is, in a certain sense, so far distant, or in another sense, so close, which in a certain sense comes to the same thing, that you can't appeal to him directly. You can't make sacrifices to him, you can't influence him. And so the way to relate to him is through the orishas. And the Orishas have been compared to the saints in Catholicism, to prophets in Islam, to the pantheon of deities in Greek or Norse mythology. They function kind of as intermediate figures who are the focus of worship, but they're always understood to be under the dominion of Olodumare.
What has been the influence of Islam's geographical expansion?
So the Prophet Mohammed in many areas amongst the Yoruba is regarded as an Orisha. Some people have argued that this has led to a greater emphasis on Olodumare as this kind of figure, that supreme deity, and being that something that's shared with Christianity in Islam to the detriment of the Orisha. But I think Olodumare has kind of always been around. And so in order to practice them, in a certain sense, they combined the veneration of saints with those of Orisha. So Shango in Cuba becomes identified with Santa Barbara. Oshun becomes identified with an aspect of the Virgin. So this has normally been understood as, we needed to do this to survive. This was a mask in order to continue the traditions.
Do you have any discussion of the traits or characteristics of the number one God?
Yes. Within the Yoruba tradition, you have what's called Oriki Olodumare, these kind of poetic descriptions of Olodumare. He sits atop the sky, who can't be encompassed by them. They're usually very, very transcendent. So it's almost a kind of a poetic, apophatic theology.
And this is pre-Islamic? Because that sounds Islamic.
You see them everywhere, regardless of Islamic influence.
Is Olodumare personal?
Everything in Orisha traditions is personal. Trees have a personality, you can interact with them. So Olodumare in the myths is described as a person, is described as a father of everything, is described as a person interacting. But doesn't set him apart. Everything, rocks talk to people and have personalities and animating things.
It just always gives me chills to see all human beings in all their ways are reaching for this ultimate and seeing it, at different levels of scientific knowledge in very similar ways.
Yes, absolutely. It's incredible. The more I see there, these they're different. You can't erase the differences, but there's this common elan. It rhymes. I asked one of my professors, why is it that all these different traditions seem to say very similar things? He said, because it's true.
What about the god or gods that emerged in the traditions of ancient India? Is God ultimate? Is God something like a person? I asked a Hindu monk who is also a philosopher with a doctorate in German idealism from Berkeley, Swami Medhananda.
Within Hinduism, there are a number of traditions which conceive God as personal. And sometimes these traditions go so far as to specify exactly what form of the personal God they accept, Vishnu Narayana or Krishna. But sometimes they say that God is personal and can manifest in different forms. Usually what you find is a hierarchy where they say that ultimate personal God can manifest in different forms as well, which are somehow lower or inferior or lesser. There's a completely different school of philosophy, which is that Shankara school of Advaita Vedanta. And what they claim is that the ultimate reality, God, even the word God might be a little bit too theistic in connotation, so they're going to eschew that kind of language in favor of language like non-dual, pure consciousness. And they accept God in the theistic or personal sense, but they say that it's a kind of lesser reality, which is only true from the standpoint of ignorance. Ignorance of what? Ignorance of non-dual pure consciousness. In my spiritual tradition, we accept, so on the one hand, many different forms of the personal God as real, and on the other hand, we accept non-dual pure consciousness as the impersonal aspect of the same infinite divine reality.
Is there a line of thinking that says there are multiple primary forms of God that are all either separate gods or manifestations of the same God?
It's not quite that. I think that there's an important view, which actually corresponds in some ways to the theology of Islam, which is that God is ultimately personal but formless. So the formless personal God can actually manifest in different forms, but this is not polytheism, it's monotheism. So my approach is that the formless personal God is fundamental. In its personal aspect. The impersonal aspect is also fundamental, and that formless personal God can manifest in different forms. Most Hindu schools accept perfect being theology, actually, and so there isn't much difference. So they're going to accept that the personal God is omniscient, omnipotent, perfectly loving, that God is the creator, preserver, and destroyer of this world,
When you say creator, the Hindu traditions generally is that the world is eternal and has not been created in a ex nihilo.
Exactly. So it's not creation out of nothing, but the universe at a particular point in time is in a contracted state, in a kind of seed form, bija rupa in Sanskrit, and that it's God who kind of activates that seed and makes it kind of grow in this manifest universe that we see, full of names and forms. And then again, it'll eventually contract.
And was that a one-time event?
So the reason why there are three epithets to God: creator, preserver, and destroyer.
Okay.
So at every point of the process, God is there either maintaining the current manifest universe. At some point, God is also going to oversee and make the universe contract into the seed state again. And one of the ways that God governs the world within Hinduism is he is the one who dispenses the fruits of our karma. God is the one who oversees that entire process and gives us what each of us deserves.
Because some schools of when dealing with karma, it's more like a natural process in the non-physical sense, as opposed to God doing it.
Absolutely.
That's a big difference.
Yeah, there are a couple schools of Indian philosophy, Sankhya and Yoga, for instance, which they don't believe that God sort of creates this world, looks over this world, dispenses karma. It's all done by Prakriti. It's capital N nature, basically. And so that's Insensation, and she's doing everything. And karma just works as a kind of...
So we had creator, preserver, and...
Destroyer.
Oh, destroyer.
And destroyer here means, again, not sort of destruction into nothingness, because that's not possible, but contraction of this universe, this manifest universe of names and forms back into a kind of seed state.
And then...
Again, process repeats itself.
Take a breath and start all over again.
Exactly. Yeah, in the course of vast eons.
But is God of any kind required for a tradition to be deeply spiritual? Could Buddhism, also originating in India, provide a counter-example? I speak with a Buddhist nun who has a master's in comparative philosophy and a doctorate in religious studies from Yale, Venerable Yifa.
In Buddhism, we don't have a creator God, and the Buddha is not creator God. In Buddhist cosmology, kind of the structure of the universe that we call triple worlds. And so the realm, the world of desire, the world of form, and the world of formless. So the world of desire basically is the human being and the animal. Also have what we call the invisible deity. You know, in Buddhism, we talk a lot about deity, like almost 28 level of the deity.
28 levels of
yes.
deity, wow.
Yes,
wow.
Okay. So that means, 6 level of the deity in this world of desire.
That's still in our own world. That's still in our world.
Yes, but we move to the second level. It's called the world of form, F-O-R-M. These are kind of higher than the world of desire. If you meditate deeper, then kind of less focus on the material, and then also more merit. And the first level of the world of form, they will call Brahma, great Brahma. And this Brahma, the idea, think of like, oh, I'm the creator of this universe. So in Buddhism, then we'll put what we call creator, the God, the capital God. It's just on this
the first of the 4.
And still not the highest.
It's still not the highest.
Yeah, not the highest. And also not out of the cycle of reincarnation.
Oh, okay.
Because what it does mean about liberation, you have to, out of the cycle, birth and death of this triple world, from Buddhist point of view, that the creator is still on the kind of secondary world.
And the lowest level of the second.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the equivalent of God.
The God, yeah. So
when you go up above that, what do you have up there?
The third level is called formless. The formless basically is almost very, very little of consciousness activity. But keep in mind, the formless, many people think that there was no thought. It's not. Neither conception nor non-conception. If you say there was no thought or no conceptualize, then people think that it's like a rock, like a wood, no consciousness at all. And that's wrong. It still have the consciousness.
But without form.
Without form.
That formless highest form is way, way above God.
Exactly. Exactly.
So Buddhism has deities, but not an ultimate God. Ultimate or not ultimate, how critical is this ultimate God question? I asked the leader of the Global Philosophy of Religion Project, Yujin Nagasawa.
Starting with the Abrahamic tradition, so there is God. So this is a monotheistic system. So God is normally considered as the greatest possible being who created the world. But also there are polytheistic systems which postulate the existence of many gods or many spirits. Some might think that the God is by definition the greatest possible being. So if they postulate something else, then they're not gods. And of course, there is atheism or non-theism. So typically, Buddhists don't believe in the existence of God, at least in the Western sense, or gods as supernatural entities.
And how do they articulate?
So for example, looking at some of the African traditions, they have their own concepts of God that are somewhat similar to the Western concept because they believe that God created the world, but often they assume that God is not perfect. So God has certain limitations. So maybe the problem of Yifa doesn't arise for people, theists in the African traditions.
In Hinduism, which many people think is a polytheistic religion, many Hindus say that it really is monotheistic in that the deities are avatars of the same deity. Islam has the 99 names. In Judaism, you're not allowed to say the name. So each of the traditions have different approaches to the names of God. Is this significant?
Yeah, this is an important philosophical question, how we define God. So for instance, Buddhism is considered to be atheistic or non-theistic. But if I'm from Japan, and if you go to Japanese Buddhist temples, you can see all kinds of deities. And how can we understand them? Are they meant to be supernatural, or are they similar to God in Western theism? It's very difficult to say. Maybe they are part of nature, but somehow they are distinct from humans. And in many Asian and African traditions, often people don't have a clear distinction between the natural realm and the supernatural realm. In the Western tradition, everything is very clear. So there is God, who is a disembodied existence, and God created this material universe. So there's a clear distinction between God and the universe. But in many other traditions, there is no clear distinction like that. And it's quite tricky to understand how God or gods or deities, they are related to physical universe in which we live. But that's where things get quite interesting.
Yeah, and in the other traditions, you generally have more complexity, not just the number of gods, but you have different realms and different hierarchies of gods.
Yeah, so in the Shinto tradition, there are 8 million gods everywhere. And obviously there's some kind of hierarchy between different gods.
And is there one on top?
It's not very clear. And that's why many monotheists claim that actually monotheism is most parsimonious, because there's just single God who is meant to be the greatest possible being. So there's no hierarchy of different divine beings.
To assess ultimate meaning, God is the bedrock issue. If there is a God, go one way. If not, another way. But even if God, more is needed. What kind of God? In Islam, God is one, infinite, transcendent, the absolute ultimate. There is nothing like God. The Islamic God has a personhood, but is not a person. The Yoruba of West Africa have a supreme deity, Oludamini, who is so transcendent that direct access is impossible, only via the Orushas, who are like saints or lesser deities. In Hinduism, God is personal, impersonal, or both. God manifests in many forms, but is secondary to cosmic consciousness, which is the ultimate ground of being. In Buddhism, while there is no God, there are the triple worlds of desire, forms, and formless, with 24 or more kinds or levels of deities. Comparing all the traditions yields commonalities and diversities. How names, realms, and hierarchies of God or deities work. I take seriously the proposition that God is ultimate, but I won't kid myself to get closer to truth.
For complete interviews and for further information, please visit closertotruth.com.